Hello and welcome to the Metagame, the series where we not only talk about board games, but also talk about talking about board games. I'm your host, Chaz Marler, and even though today, April Fool's Day, is my least favorite day of the year, it's still the perfect opportunity to share a true tale of board gaming with you, the audience. This one's going to be about one of the most foolish characters ever to partake in an RPG session with me. And to be clear, let me clarify. The character being played was a fool, not necessarily the human player behind it. Okay, I'll leave that up to your discretion. But regardless, either way, it's a great way to set the stage for today's question. In character-driven board games and RPGs, how much role-playing is too much? Afterwards, I'll skim the YouTube chat section for questions, and then we'll have an informal Q&A session about this topic, and really, about anything else that's on your minds today. To have one of your posts considered for the Q&A portion of the show, post it in the YouTube chat area, being sure to include the hashtag that we know and love, TMG for the metagame, in your comment and your chat post. I'll be, after the presentation, I'm going to be using a search tool to highlight those comments so they stand out to me, and I'll address those. Now, not all submitted comments that are posted in the chat will be featured on the show, but I do try to go back and reread the ones that I've missed afterwards. So, let me just do a quick sound check in the chat to make sure everything sounds good. We can hear and see me. Excellent. Awesome time. All right, well, let's get started. Let me share with you my true tale of board gaming that took place on that long summer night so many years ago. It was the early 90s, and the group of friends that I gamed with we were all getting ready to go off to college that fall. So with several of us moving away, we knew that we weren't going to be able to get together to play and game as often. So in many ways, this particular RPG session would likely be one of our last hurrahs. So we knew we had to make it good. Now, I was GMing, so I prepared some extra twists for that night's adventuring, as the four other players rolled up their character sheets for their trek through the fantastical fantasy realm that I would be having them explore. Now, once the characters had been generated, the party introduced themselves to me and one another. There was a fierce Xena-like fighter, a greedy thief, a mostly competent magic user, and his brother, a lumbering giant of a man who was drastically dim-witted, but still utterly devoted to protecting and serving his brother. And we were reminded of this fact quite often throughout the evening from his slowly repeated vow that he would be willing to give his brother the shirt off his back. And so the characters were created and the stage was set. And soon the adventure was in full swing. A brief establish the storyline here, a short combat to get everyone warmed up there, a quick side quest, a puzzle, and then on to the primary plot point, navigating a haunted labyrinth. Now, this would be an appropriate place to pause the story in order to mention that I personally believe that there are basically two types of role players in the world. Those who essentially play themselves dressed in a character's class. Oh, look, it's Chaz the Mage. Oh, look, it's Chaz the Necromancer. Next week, oh, look, it's going to be Chaz the Paladin. And then there are those who act as a vessel, letting their character's traits and attributes govern their decision-making process, no matter what the consequences for themselves or their party. These are players who let the character drive their actions. And while the first three players in the group were the former, the dim-witted lumbering brute who was utterly devoted to his brother was the latter. So round after round, decision after decision, the lumbering brute would roll his 20-sided dice and consult its result before taking the appropriate action. No matter what. For strength and constitution checks, this worked out fine. No problem. It was a breeze. But unfortunately, such was not the case for any challenge that required brain power. And that is how the lumbering giant became separated from the rest of his party within the murky depths of the haunted labyrinth, just after a few rolls of the dice. So there he was, on his own, and lost. Now, since this was one of our team's last hurrahs, we were doing everything that we could to make it special. There were props. We were traveling to different rooms of the house for different things. So when the hulking fool got separated from the rest of the party, he actually went off into another room all by himself. Alone, frightened, and worst of all, unable to protect his brother, the wizard. Now, in order for the party to succeed in this particular mission, they would have to exit the labyrinth together. So, remaining split up was not an option for them. They had to figure out how to get themselves all back together. So, round after round, I ran back and forth between the two rooms, never telling one room what the other one was doing, because they were separated. Now, eventually, the group of three came upon an idea. The wizard would summon up all his mystic might to try and establish a telepathic link to his lost brother, and then guide him back. After all, telepathy is kind of magical, right? Yeah? And being brothers should give him an advantage in making it work, especially with a brother as completely devoted as his, right? I considered the plausibility of such a request, calculated the modifiers, and gave the mostly competent mage the target number to roll for. So mustering every ounce of energy that he had, he rolled his dice, and to everyone's surprise, he made it. Just barely, but he made it. But yeah. So a tenuous, fragile telepathic link was established, and the mage dictated his message to me, and then I dashed out to the other room to go and deliver it. Barging into the dim-witted giant's room, I informed him that he suddenly hears a voice in his head telling him which direction to go. The giant looked at me, nodded in acknowledgement, and then promptly picked up his 20-sided dice, rolled it, and frowned. He immediately dropped to his knees, clutching his head in his meaty fist, and screamed that, I'm hearing voices! The plan was not off to a good start. So, I returned to the room with the main party and delivered the bad news to them. But there was still time. They still had the connection made. There was still time on the clock, so they sent me off with another message to clarify and make things better. So, I ran off and delivered it. Another 20-sided dice roll. Another frown. It got worse. And so this whole scenario continued for a while. Back and forth I ran, delivering one message after another, each more specifically designed to try and convince the giant that he was hearing his brother speaking to him and not, in fact, having a horrible psychotic episode. Unfortunately, the dim-witted giant remained as devoted to the results of his 20-sided die as he did to his brother. And he continued to roll it, and the results continued to make him frown and question his sanity. Before long, time was running out. One more failed attempt and the telepathic link would be severed. The group really needed a surefire way to convince the giant of whose voice he was hearing in his head. And then the mage had an epiphany. recalling the giant's repeated vow of devotion that he would, quote, give his brother the shirt off his back. The mage sent one more message to clarify his identity. In a last-ditch effort, he sent the message that, quote, I need you to give me the shirt off your back. Aha! I delivered the message. There was a look of hope in the giant's eyes. But then, unsurprisingly, he reached for his 20-sided dice before responding. The sound of the dice dancing across the tabletop was all that I could hear, and I stood breathless until finally it came to a stop. Frozen in anticipation, I watched as the dim-witted giant looked down at the results, and then, without even raising his gaze, defeatedly uttered, "Ah, crap." Dejected, I returned to the main party to deliver to them the disappointing news. And downtrodden, they completed each of their turns, and then I returned back to the room containing the lost dullard so he could take his turn and finish off the round. And then the most amazing thing happened. The party was reunited because the main group came running into the giant's room to find out why I was screaming in terror. And what they found when they arrived was a horrified GM standing in the kind of shocked terror that can only happen when you walk into a room to discover a dim-witted giant standing there with his character sheet held strategically to cover the fact that he was, in fact, naked as the day he was born. There was a long silence. I don't know, 4, 5 years, seemed like. But finally, someone mustered up the mental faculties to ask him what the bloody heck he was doing. And slowly, he pointed to his 20-sided dice, still sitting there on the table. He had not only rolled a failure in his attempt to interpret the telepathic request, but had rolled a critical failure, and as such, had offered not only his shirt, but every article of clothing he had at his disposal to appease the insistent, persistent voices in his head. We all learned a lot of things that night. For example, I learned what it looks like when a group of people all slowly back out of a room in unison. And the dim-witted giant was rewarded with more experience points than we could collectively count. And then, immediately afterwards, the character was permanently retired. And then that player who played that character vowed to us to never, ever pull such a stunt again. And I believe him. Except that I swear I caught a glimpse of him checking the result of another 20-sided dice shortly after he gave us that vow. So, there you have it. For better or for worse, a true tale of the most devoted role player I have ever encountered. But thinking back on this story, I can't help but wonder, in character-driven board games and RPGs, is there a point where too much role-playing is simply too much? Let's turn our attention over to the YouTube chat, and let's see what everyone has to say about this topic. All right, going over here and grabbing my chat window. I'm thinking about bleach and mental floss to kind of clear my mind. And I'm going to search for the hashtag. And let's see what's going on today in the old comments. All right. Sorry. There we go. Okay. I see a lot of ews, which is to be expected from this particular story. All right, here we go. Here's one. They're not highlighting very well. Let me make sure they're highlighting now. Okay. OrielFan31 mentions with the hashtag. Okay. I'm all for people playing, but I always do a mix of me and my character, so that way I'm not playing me. Yeah, that's... I think you need to make that distinction. Otherwise, you end up playing everyone else. Like, I think the four of us got totally played on that one night. But, yes. Someone says that sounds like is a good reason not to LARP. Those for you perhaps not in the know, LARP stands for live action role playing. That's where people actually act out and are in character and actually physically doing things during the role playing session. I myself have never taken part in a LARP. I think this scenario was probably the closest I've come, and I'm not exactly sure how much it makes me want to continue doing anything close to that in the future. So I can understand that point of view. Okay. So people can really get into their RPGs. Oh, Benjamin mentions Hodor for D&D. Yeah, the character. I'll just talk about the player. Now all five of us that were involved in that night's role-playing session, we're all best friends, and we're still in touch to this day. One player lives on the East Coast now, but the rest of us live within an hour and a half of each other. So and even the one on the East Coast is the actual real life brother of one of us. So we do keep in touch fairly well. But so we have we have kind of that close group. We don't role play together as much as we used to, if at all anymore. But we do try to keep in touch. But that particular player is one of, we've played other role playing games, even just he and I and stuff. And he is one of the, in my experience, one of the best role players I've ever played with. He does frequently let the character take over. And I was going to mention during the presentation part, but it got cut to keep things kind of moving. I was going to mention how there's two types of RPG players. If I had to choose someone who is just them putting on a class, like now I'm Chaz the Paladin, something like that, and someone who actually creates a character and gets into that character, I personally enjoy the latter approach. Creating that character and becoming that character, perhaps not to this fellow's extremes, I will say, but I think that is always, makes a better role-playing experience. When everyone can lose themselves in the story and the characters, is really something that I strive for when I play. But obviously, with mixed results. But let's continue. Let's return to the chats here. Sam mentions that he says people should act true to their characters as long as it makes the game fun and positive. And I agree. I've played with some characters that want to be kind of thieves and such, so they'll like pass notes or do things where they actually secretly steal from the other players in their group, in their party, their comrades and their friends. They'll actually be stealing stuff out of their bags so that when the characters go to grab their sword or gold, you have to tell them, oh, well, that's missing. And then like, what? And that leads to a whole mess when you're doing that type of thing. I can understand the character wanting to get in that thief mentality and sneaky, but that seems to me has always seemed to be at the detriment of the fun of everyone else. So I agree that there's definitely a line where you can be immersed in a character, but keep things fun. This particular instance that I have shared with you all, I don't know if it ranks on the fun, but sure gave us a story to tell for years to come. Okay. Let's see here. Who's next? Let me just reset the comments here. Sorry. Let's see here. Characters. Oh, Christopher H. mentions it was certainly memorable and you can't unsee it. Yeah, That's true, isn't it? Thank you, Christopher, for reminding me of that, like stabbing a nice railroad spike into my mind's eye. I can't help but wonder, Christopher H., if you've ever had any sort of role-playing experience similar to that at all. Let's move on to the rest of the comments here. 20-Sided Turtle brings not only an awesome username, but also a statement that I don't think it's necessary that the role-playing... Oh, I don't think it's necessarily the role-playing that's the problem, but maybe the dice rolling. You don't always need to make a check. Seems like more role-playing should equal less dice rolling. And I can see that. I've seen even that same person I've talked about that I enjoyed role-playing with the most. I've seen that person and others kind of take it on a character-by-character basis. Kind of how does this character think? And so I've seen ones where you're driven by a plot point, and everything, the character knows everything they do is driven by that plot point. Like, someone, the six-fingered man killed my father. Everything I do is going to be weighed against, does this get me closer to my goal of finding the six-fingered man that killed my father and seeking revenge? And if it doesn't get me closer to obtaining that goal, I'm not going to do it. And that's perfectly fine. And no dice rolling needed at all. And I've seen other characters that play more like Two-Face, almost, flipping a coin to determine and doing the checks. I think it's always nice to have the checks in place. And personally, I think it's neat to mix it up and kind of get a variety there. So if someone always checks against their stats every single game, every single play session, every single character, I can see that getting old. But I think it's nice to mix it up and kind of have some variety in it. All right, let's see who's next. Kabuki Kid, hello ma'am, mentions that she played with a DM once who barely rolled once in an entire session. Okay, I think I see a couple other comments here from Kabuki Kid. I'm going somewhere with this. Goes on to mention she used to play D&D with actors, and that was sure an experience, and it really made you role play a lot more. But they switched off at the end of the game, and hopefully they don't go home in character. Oh, that was actually by someone else. Okay. The reason I mentioned all of that, Kabuki Kid, is I was wondering when you said that you had a DM once who barely rolled once an entire session. Was that a good experience, positive or negative? Was that fun or worse? I can see it going both ways. So let me know in a follow-up chat comment, because in our group, I'd say 90% of the time I was the one who GM'd because wannabe tyrant, overbearing wannabe tyrant. So that was my actual nickname in high school. So anyway, I was the one who DM'd most often in the game sessions that we had. And there were times where I tried to have things very, very story driven and have things really mapped out, and so I would barely roll things at all. But then there were other times where I left everything completely open, where you say, okay, you start out in the middle of a town square, and just seeing where the character, and having no actual, maybe a rough idea of some goal I want them to achieve, but letting it be completely open to how the players weave their way towards it. And that requires a lot of dice rolling. So you kind of have to balance, you have to balance it, because you have the possibility of having things too scripted and just on rails and no fun, versus having things too open-ended and nothing happens and the players just run around doing nothing. Trying to find a balance in there. So I'm curious, how the other DMs, one that didn't roll dice at all, how that experience was. Was it fun, or was it too scripted and on the rails? Okay, continuing on. All right. There's a couple of comments I'm going to strategically skip because I want to keep my time on the Dice Tower family-friendly show. So thank you for the witty remarks, though, there. Let's see here. Let's continue on. Another person mentions that I think there was a time that they had issues with players having characters steal from one another or fight when they were like 13. Oh, yeah, that's another thing that personally, as a GM, I try to discourage, I can't stand, is when the players actually want to fight each other just because they're being jerks or they're confrontational. I think it would be really neat if you could set up a scenario where tension builds over a long time to the point where someone just loses it and there is an actual player versus player no holds barred battle. But that, to me, to be something that would work, would require a lot of build-up and stuff like that. And actually, I'm gonna pause right here for a moment. I want to mention something else. Now, I don't want the conversation today to feel like you necessarily has to be about role-playing games, because board games are open to this too. It seems to be more of a challenge, but I'll give you another example that I just thought of, trying to bring board games back into this. My local play group, my local game group that we meet down at the community center, we've met together enough times. It's been like almost 2 years now that we've been getting together. And there's a core group of like 9 people or so. Sometimes we have up to almost 20 people, but there's this core group. So we've gotten to know each other pretty well, and we've started to relax around each other and have fun. So there's a couple people in the group that love One Night Ultimate Werewolf. And when they play One Night Ultimate Werewolf, one player in particular gets really, really into character when we play. For example, there's one time when they at least claim to be a villager, he'll go off on this 2-minute tirade about his turnip farm and how he's just a lowly villager trying to get his turnips grown and on and everything like that, which is fun, but can also be distracting and a bit much sometimes, especially in One Night Ultimate Werewolf, where you have a certain time frame where you have a time limit where you're trying to determine who's the werewolves. So, and there's been other games as well, even games that you wouldn't think are as prone to role playing, like Small World is one that I remember we played, and even some card games. So this is a person that, we love him, and he's considered a good friend and always welcome in the group, but really, really finds opportunities to role play in games, board games, that you wouldn't think are susceptible to role playing at all. So am I the only person whose game group has this issue? Do other people out there, have they run into this? Do we have people playing suburbia who come in, with a hard hat and blueprints and start talking about city planning and, take out tape measures and little other survey tools? In Rex, do they start acting as a vicious dictator more so than usual? So, am I the only one who has had this experience, not only with role-playing games, but with board games as well? Let's bring that up in the comments as well. All right, let's, my YouTube comments are about to jump here. Yep, they jumped, I apologize. So let's see what's next here. Right. Oh yes, Kabuki Kid followed up, mentioning that the DM who barely rolled dice was actually quite good. So they never fussed. He told good stories. Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad that it was actually a positive experience, because I could see it going either way. So cool, very neat. Okay. Pat, I'm going to butcher your name. I'm sorry. Pagan Eagle 2001. Oh yeah, that's probably it. Pagan Eagle 2001 mentions that there has to be a fine balance between script and fun, and that is true. A really good example of a discussion on the balance between script and fun would be the Secret Cabal gaming podcast. Secret Cabal has an on and off again series on building a role-playing group, and one of the things they talk about a lot is scripting and scenarios and setting up the environment and the stage. So I would recommend checking out this member of the Dice Tower podcast network. So check out the Secret Cabal, because they have really good 3 and 4 hour discussions on that topic, but it's really, really good discussions. All right, let's see who is next. Cyanide Tierney, that's your name now because that's how it's being pronounced today, says that as a GM, they don't roll dice unless it's combat or they're rolling in reaction to a player's roll, like when they're rolling to determine if their NPC is lying. And they are in a very role-playing heavy group. So it's kind of reactionary when you roll. It's not like you're just telling the tale and letting the tale weave itself. It's all in reaction to the stuff the players are doing. I think that is a good approach, and that keeps things from going off the rails too quickly, too easily. So I'm going to keep that in mind next time I DM anything, if and when. Someone else mentions a DM who lets the players basically, quote unquote, write their own stories is the best. They like the sandbox aspect to the game, and that shouldn't be removed. I agree. I think as you've mentioned, and probably you'll see when I start talking about top games of my top 100 games, I love sandbox environments and sandbox anything that leaves you open-ended to tell your own story and kind of gives you the tools to make your own adventures like that, role-playing game or board game. I enjoy that a lot too. Okay, a little jump there. Come back. Caught it in time. Benjamin mentions, asks, thoughts on the Dice Tower people getting together and having a light LARPing of Mice and Mystics? That's a good question. I know a lot of conventions have events that can be created and signed up for in advance. And I know that the Dice Tower is moving to a new location for the Dice Tower convention this July. So I don't know if there's the space available for any type of event like that. And to be honest, I imagine that they have an event creation and sign up system, but I'm not familiar with it off the top of my head. I do know that the Dice Tower convention has a very good and active Facebook group. So if you're interested in that and going to Dice Tower Con or just curious, go find the Dice Tower Convention Facebook group, and I'm sure they'll be able to elaborate on everything that's available for that type of thing. Good question. Okay. Pagan Eagle mentions again that it isn't the same thing about RPGs. Isn't the same thing about RPGs similar to Find the Traitor games? Tensions can build up if things don't go their way. I would hope so, actually. I would hope that the characters would be willing to get into character enough that they're willing to make decisions that might seem counterintuitive to the group at first, because the character has their own motivations. And if everything is just always happy singing, doing backflips, and always going the group's way, that's not necessarily as interesting when you have people that do have their own motivations, sometimes secret, and sometimes have a line that they're not willing to cross, even at the detriment of the group. Again, you got to balance that with keeping things fun for everyone. Whether it's a role-playing game or a game of One Night Ultimate Werewolf, you got to balance the fun versus how much you want to talk about your turnip farm. Okay. Someone mentions that role-playing during Cosmic Encounter can be a ton of fun. Now that's a board game that I think is really, really opens the door for some good role-playing and characterization. I agree. Cosmic Encounter is just begging for role-playing. Actually, I have some studio lights in my way, but I'm going to look through my shelves right now and see which games on my shelves I think are most open to role-playing. Let's see. There's King of Tokyo, not so much, because you're just rolling the dice and having the character interactions from that. You don't have a lot of other decisions that you could be making in that scenario. Let's see here. Smash Up, meh. Ashes, meh. I think Survive Escape from Atlantis and Survive Space Attack, since those are similar, could be one. They don't give you characters to roleplay, but I think that one definitely, as the characters are struggling through this mutual conflict with each other, Survive could definitely be one that's open to it. Nothing personal, of course, is just dying for it, just like Cosmic Encounter is. That's a weird correlation between those two games and role-playing. Let's see here. Rex, Final Days of an Empire. Eldritch Horror, of course, would be really open to that. Dark Moon. Well, any Hidden Trader game is going to be open to that. And I'll try and find one more. I can't really see any other good ones, so I'll just pick Zombie Dice. Yeah. Zombie Dice. Oh, yes. I remember the great role-playing Zombie Dice revolution of 2014. No, I don't. Okay, let's move on. If you guys can think of any other board games that are prone to a role-playing environment and really getting into character, post those in the chat as well, and we'll go through a list if we can. Okay. Matias mentions that to be a really good DM is really hard. Have played RPGs since the early 80s and have only had one really good DM in all of that time and a lot of mediocre ones, but only one great one. Oh yeah, I think that anytime you GM, it's like you're putting on a show, and it requires a lot of preparation to really have it done right. I am a big fan of having actual like props and things, and I think I mentioned a couple of episodes ago when I was playing Star Trek Fleet Captains with my best friend. And we played it a few times. And the most recent time, I surprised him by, after we set up the board, saying, oh, by the way, here's an incoming message from Starfleet. You have to do this thing. And it turned into an RPG session as we were playing Star Trek Fleet Captains. And there was, little props on the table. I had encoded messages, which I did a little cryptogram and gave him those, and he had to figure out those as we were taking our turns before something happened and triggered an event. And he had the solution to solve it, but he had to figure out. So I'm a real big fan of preparation and props and having stories, simple things like that, actual puzzles. If you could role play in an escape room, I think that would be one of the ultimate experiences that you could do. Having actual puzzles that were prepared and having your actual characters go through it. That would be amazing to role play in an escape room. But for now, let's continue on with the notes here. I'm going to refresh my list, make them pop up. And jump. Oh, here we go. LARPing. Here we go. Someone asks, how about an RPG where warriors, mages, etc. sit down and roleplay office jobs? You are wonderful. That would be fantastic. That almost makes me wonder if there's been a YouTube series about something like that, or at least a video. If not, there should be right now. There should be. Thank you. Sam mentions Sheriff of Nottingham makes him role play, but he doesn't know why. That's another good one. I think Sheriff of it's another one. In our little cosmic encounter, nothing personal, Sheriff of Nottingham. I'm seeing a trend here. Maybe I need to ask someone about this trend. But yes, Sheriff of Nottingham is very susceptible to role playing as well. That's in our local game group at the community center with that same turnip farmer guy. He also loves Sheriff of Nottingham. And again, yes, gets really, really into character about either being a lowly peasant or the most ridiculously vicious, conniving sheriff you can imagine. And it makes more sense in that environment, in that game environment. But still, you're always in for a bit of a ride when he's sitting in on a game of Sheriff of Nottingham. 20-Sided Turtle mentions again that they finished Time Stories, Prophecy of the Dragon, last night. And that board game and that module specifically seems to encourage role-playing among the players. However, it seems like board gamers shy away from role-playing. And he thinks it's fun to role-play, but doesn't want to make others feel uncomfortable. He's not that guy, though. And he doesn't role-play in Suburbia. Well, good. There's hope still then. Time Stories is a really good one. When we played, a group of friends and I played Time Stories at BGG-Con, and we, in one sitting, went through the entire Asylum scenario. It took a while, but it was fun. And I know when we started, we were all really trying to play the characters that we were given. We were really trying, I don't want to give any spoilers, but so the characters that we selected to play, we really tried to actually act and be in character. And over the course of the game, it kind of petered out, and it just turned into us trying to finish all the puzzles and everything. But yeah, I agree that Time Stories is another game that is very, very susceptible and compatible with role-playing by the players. All right. Oh, we had a jump. Trevor mentions, we had a group of about 6 or so who used to RPG, and we had a lady ask to guest GM a session with her son as a player. She required everyone to act out their actions, whereas we usually just explained. It was extremely awkward for everyone involved. that sounds like something that I could see happening. Yeah, and being extremely awkward when it does happen. We try to let the flow, at least I hope that we let the flow be very natural when we would role play, and going from room to room and having props and doing 3D puzzles and the interaction, I hope was organic. If it's organic and everyone's into it, it can be a lot of fun. But if it's if only one person is into that and everyone else is just going through the motions, I can definitely make things a little bit awkward. So so definitely should be said that really getting into character and putting on a performance when you role play, definitely not something that I think is a requirement to have a good role-playing session. If it's organic, awesome, but otherwise, you're just talking and sitting around at a table still can be a fantastic role-playing experience. Still, I wish I could have watched that. Okay. Oh, here's a couple more comments. First of all, continuing on with Sheriff of Nottingham. Someone mentions, that's why some gamers really dig games like Sheriff of Nottingham, and it falls flat for others. There's just different types of gamers, and everything isn't for everyone. That's a very good point. And continuing that thought, the next person mentioned that there's a bit of role-playing in Dead of Winter. Maybe it's more storytelling than role-playing. We enjoy storytelling more than role-playing. That's a really good point. That's a good distinction. The distinction between storytelling and role-playing. One, everyone is sharing in the same story and guiding it, and the other one is separate characters contributing to that central story. That's a good distinction there. And speaking of Dead of Winter, that is another game, yes, I think it's very susceptible to it. I'm wondering how much role-playing other people have experienced with Dead of Winter. Because in my own experience, I've played it a few times, and I've always been let down by that, actually. I've wanted more role-playing by the players when we've played Dead of Winter. But other than someone kind of doing the twist of, haha, I was the traitor, or something, and everyone getting paranoid, I haven't really seen, the people I've played with haven't really gotten into character, and I'm wondering if that would help fuel the paranoia, fuel the urgency of the situation by having all of these foreign characters that you're interacting with instead of your buddies. But so far, that experience has not panned out that way. Orioles fan, hello. Orioles fan mentions, my game group will roleplay games that offer the opportunity, such as Sheriff of Nottingham. Just adding an accent can make the game a little more fun. True. You don't have to go out of your way. You don't have to have bells and whistles and chimes and costumes or anything like that, or lack of costumes, as the case may be. But yeah, just a simple accent or something like that can really add that layer of a little bit of a role-playing difference to a game. So, and again, it's not a necessity, not a requirement, but it's just something you can play around with. Pagan Eagle mentions that Fragged Empire is a nice RPG. I'll make note of that. I have not heard of Fragged Empire yet. I'll have to check that one out. And the comments are going to jump as I reset my search. So one, I apologize. Let's see, awkward, Fragged Empire. Someone mentions Kremlin was one that always brought out role-playing. And I believe Kremlin is kind of a precursor to Nothing Personal, which was mentioned as well, isn't it? I think so. All right. Again, sorry, April Fools. I'm going to butcher your name. Celoin? April Fool. So they mention that we always play the roles in Spyfall. Oh, Spyfall. He mentions we always play the roles in Spyfall. It makes the game a lot more fun for us. Okay, that's interesting. My experience with Spyfall has been the opposite. And actually, now that I think about it, I have to backpedal a little bit. Spyfall, actually, since no one knows who's who, might be difficult to roleplay in, unless you're just trying to bluff or not, convince someone you're not bluffing. But in Spyfall, when all the games I've played, we actually always ignore the roles because the roles seem to make it actually more difficult in a way. I can see it both ways. But we've always let people just concentrate on the location and just take it wherever they want. We might have to try incorporating the roles again and also really role-playing those roles to see what happens. That's an interesting one. I would not have thought of Spyfall, though, because of the way that we have approached it. So thank you. Good one. Someone mentions, I remember a Dragon magazine comic with fantasy characters playing as office workers. Oh, there we go. So it's at least been presented in comic format. So there we go. Someone mentions that Pandemic Legacy, the role-playing game. This reminds me of a story, because I was going to think, Pandemic Legacy, the role-playing game, why don't you just give each other a cold? In the realm of that thought and role-playing and such, when I, again, that same time period, high school, college, a friend of mine and I were really into Street Fighter. Had it on the Super Nintendo, played it in the arcades. We were always into Street Fighter. And we would make a list of all the different characters in Street Fighter, and we would roll dice to see randomly which ones we would fight against each other. And, we would have little tournaments and things and continuity to the story sometimes and all of that stuff. So we were playing Street Fighter once, and I remember we were playing, and after a while I turned to him and said, man, if only we could make this more immersive. And my friend was like, well, what do you mean? I was like, like attaching little electrodes to us. So like when we actually got punched in the game, it actually zap us or hurt us a little bit. Oh, that would be so weird. My friend looked at me, put down his controller, and blankly just said, why don't we just beat each other up? And yeah, okay. So I guess the point is not every game needs to be turned into a role-playing experience. So I'll concede that. Okay. Jarb states, what would feel better? Playing a prepared history where no one has to spend time trying to figure out how to do it, or do your own adventure and play as freely as the group wants? That's an excellent question. That's something that we touched on earlier. I think personally, my most enjoyment comes out of doing a mix out of that. And sometimes in the same campaign, and sometimes in the same play session, and sometimes one play session to the next, or different campaigns. I think I always had the most fun, though, when we would get together and we'd sit down and I'd say, okay, here's the situation. We all know who the characters are. We're in this town. Here's the situation. We need to accomplish A, B, and C. And by the way, whatever happens, happens. And so we had times where we had things go catastrophically wrong, and entire towns would be a mob would be chasing our characters out of town. And we had one person accidentally blow up the palace of some kind of ruthless dictator that had this hold over this countryside, but then of course immediately took the advantage to take over and become his own ruthless dictator himself. So sometimes, again, it depends on the group and it depends on what you want to accomplish with the story, but if everyone's in that mood, sometimes those can lead to the best stories to tell. Okay. Someone mentions Doomtown Reloaded could be an RPG. It definitely has the characters and the motivations for those characters to get into character. So that's a good one. 20-Sided Turtle posts again that asks, Chaz, coming from D&D background, how do you feel about mini games like Descent or Dungeon Saga? I have trouble getting into them because they feel so restrictive and have so much setup for something that I can do in my head. Oh, that's a good question. I enjoy Descent. I haven't played Dungeon Saga, but I do enjoy Descent a lot. And games like that. But I agree, they're a completely different animal. I feel that I have to go into it with a different mindset. And even if you try to role play in Descent, I never really see it. I've never seen it work because you have a very turn-based combat objective system in place, and it's not storytelling as much. Now, I've taken, or I've wanted to take, Descent pieces, Heroescape pieces, and create a role-playing environment with those things and having tactical combat and stuff. But yeah, the Descent and games like that, board games that are dungeon crawls and that type of fantasy RPG experience, it's a completely, you have to go into it, I think, with a different mindset. And if you go in thinking games like that are going to offer the same role-playing experience, I have always been disappointed in that because they just never live up to the same thing. But in that same vein, I don't think that they're really trying to replicate D&D. They're trying to replicate a portion of that experience, and then that's okay. I still enjoy the games, but yeah, I think that they can be restrictive when you want to do that, and you got to take it for what it's worth. Then mentioned about Dead of Winter. Role-playing is tougher in Dead of Winter because you might be playing 3 or 4 characters. Yes, that is true. You often play multiple characters in Dead of Winter, which makes role-playing much more difficult. Still, it's a good game for it, though. Okay, we're down to about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to do one more search for comments and questions and whatnot. Someone asks, human GM or app GM? Oh my. I've never... human GM, for me personally. I would say 99.9% of the time. I mean, that's the whole point of role-playing, I think. And the GM helps guide the story and go with the punches and the twists and turns that are introduced by the players. I just don't see how an app could bring that life to the scenario. But to be honest, I've never used, or I don't even really know off the top of my head of any DMing apps that are available. So that would be something to post in the comments. If anyone knows, put a link to any role-play DM apps that are available, because that would be really interesting to find out more about, because I've never even experienced one. Okay. Someone else mentions that, well, yes, Descent is going to be Descent is going to an app GM. Well, okay, and again for Descent, that kind of makes sense because as I just mentioned, at least to me, Descent is different than a role-playing experience. So for Descent and games like that makes sense to have an app being the overlord. That totally makes sense, and I don't think that would diminish the experience because you're still just fighting against that thing, which is going to do surprises. But the overlord isn't like introducing, sub-quests and NPCs and allowing weird things to happen like that. All right, and starting to round out the discussion here, someone mentions that for Spyfall, in one game of Spyfall, we were at the bank and three of the players realized that they were a robber, an armored truck driver, and security guard, and they played out a robbery at the end of the round. Wow. Now to figure all of that out would really be something to see, them put those pieces together and what they did with it. I agree, that sounds awesome. All right. One more here, a couple more, and we'll round things out. Nighthawk states, have you investigated any possible ties between Asmodee and Passport Games, business ties or otherwise? Consider the risk that maybe you are being kept busy. Things like that that actually happen. Okay, well, this is really big tangent, but I will mention this. I'll just state, I'll keep it brief. No, I haven't. And keep in mind too that what's one thing that's awesome about the board game industry and community, and especially when you are a media creator and you go to conventions and you interview and talk to a lot of people, when you're involved in this community, you get to know a lot of the people involved. And the people I'm working with, I've actually known for years beforehand. So it's not so much a faceless corporation. For the most part, you know the food chain that you're working with. And that's actually another benefit, is getting to work with these people that you already know and have friendships with. But anyway, so yeah, no, I am all for a good conspiracy theory, but that one, I'm pretty sure that there's nothing going on. I'll just take a drink though of this special water they gave me which was really nice of them to give me some water before the show. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Metagame. Thank you so much for taking the time to participate with me. And for more board game news, reviews, and commentary, be sure to check out and subscribe to our friends at The Dice Tower and Pair of Dice Paradise, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. Because thanks to the internet, asking people, complete strangers, to be your friend doesn't sound creepy anymore. So, till next time, I've been Chaz Marler, and together with you guys in the comments section, we've been playing The Metagame. I'll see you next time.
For watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.